This is the Candidly Kim podcast.
Welcome to Candidly Kim. This is our fifth podcast with our awesome producer, Doran Barton.
Hi.
Say hi to the kids.
Hello, kids.
We have a great discussion. Great discussion tonight. So many things kind of converging together to kind of make some disaster zones for some of our cities. And we've mentioned this before, right here in Salt Lake City, we just have an explosion of an increase in property crimes. We've got massive encampments of people experiencing homelessness. We think that some of them are chronic, sort of the chronic homeless population, but we saw an interesting mingling of sort of the protest movement into our city as well. And so I have been receiving nonstop calls and emails, text messages with videos. People are sending me their ring videos that they're recording, all kinds of crazy stuff, and then they're just pleading and they're saying, nobody's responding, and the responses can be very, very late. Just a couple nights ago, a lady that's been just pleading with me, and by the way, I'm on the opposite side of Salt Lake County, and so it's interesting to me that people way from about as far away as you can get in this county.
So what kind of response are they getting when they go to the city?
So I'm talking to some of the residents, and so in particular, the other night, it's late. It's maybe, I think it's about 11 o'clock. And this lady, a single mom, has a child with a disability that she's trying to care for. And a neighbor calls her and says, "You got to see this," sends her ring video of people who are squeezing through her back fence into her yard. And they're carrying stuff. They're carrying equipment. We don't know what they're carrying, but she's watching this in her backyard, and so calling the police, and she texted to let me know, here's what I'm calling the police. Let's see if they respond, because her experience is that they haven't been responding, or it'll be maybe days later, but definitely hours later. In this case, it was almost an hour. It was like 48 minutes. Now, there is an intruder in your backyard, intruders in her backyard. Her neighbors are recording it, through a Ring camera, and she's going, there are people in my backyard. Where is the threat? We've seen some incidents across the country where people are trying to defend their castle, their domicile. And there's been sort of mixed reception about that. But, when they're in your backyard, that's not the front sidewalk. That's not the easement park strip.
Right.
This is your backyard.
Right.
And if there is a threat to your safety, it's when someone in the middle of the night has climbed through your fence. And by the way, she had something of a small hole in her fence due to the windstorm a couple weeks back. So a panel or two was damaged, and so these people are like a parade of people climbing through this hole in her fence, and almost an hour to get a response. Almost an hour.
Wow.
Now, so we're not going to criticize the police. I'm a strong supporter of the police. That's not what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about why. What is going on that it takes an hour for police to respond to, a significant threat? I mean, if you're in my backyard.
Yeah, and I know you've talked to some of the officers.
Yes. So we have a special guest with us tonight. We have Tyler Clancy, who is with the Pioneer Park Coalition. Now, let me just introduce that coalition a little bit, because their name has been kind of for good and for evil on the battle to in Salt Lake City to have better law enforcement with property crimes, property issues. but also very engaged in Operation Rio Grande, and even before that, kind of as a precursor to seeing these are residents of Salt Lake City. They're business owners, and so they absolutely have all kinds of interests in keeping their city safe, keeping their city clean, keeping their city economically viable. And people choose a city to live in and to have their business. Those are big investments people make, and so absolutely they have an interest in having some of these problems resolved. But as I've worked with them, there have been sometimes people want to discredit them and say, "Oh, you don't care about the homeless people. You don't care about these things. You just care because you're property owners and you just want your property to maintain its value." And I say, "Yeah, and like that's a bad thing." So what we see in Salt Lake City again is an explosion of an increase in property crimes. We have had some orders. We have a number of police officers that have been very disclosing to us, sometimes cautiously so because they don't want to get in trouble with their boss, but have expressed a deep concern about orders to stand down on property crimes. Until there's actually physical crime happening. Well, I don't know where you want to draw the line between that property crime and the actual personal crime of an assault. But you're in my backyard, you're getting really close to that line, if that's me. But also, that we have seen also an explosion in encampments of people experiencing homelessness. The Salt Lake Tribune did an article a couple weeks ago, and they actually refer to the people as campers in encampments, but not that you're bringing over s'mores or anything. But I think that's an interesting. I'd never really heard it in my couple years working in the policy arena, calling them campers. I mean, I guess that's technically kind of what they're doing.
I think we first experienced that with Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah, Occupy Wall Street, because we saw tent cities. So, we talked about tent cities and people were in tents. But, you go to 7th South in Salt Lake, kind of around the library. And what is it, about 2nd East. And it's a village. I mean, it is a full-on, and there's organization. I mean, you look at it and it's almost parceled. And so one of the things that the officers have also expressed to us that's very concerning is there's also been a big infusion of unregistered RVs. And so one of the officers I talked to said he kind of just took a section of them and was concerned. They're not registered. Okay, I'm not a big glowing fan of vehicle registration. Frequently, we've kind of taken care of that and minimized that regulation here in Utah. But there is a very high correlation between really long expired vehicle registrations and crime. So all of a sudden, the officers have seen this infusion of RVs throughout the town. And so one of them just decided, he's going to kind of check up, just take a sort of a cross, sample of them, and about 10, and looked into, who these people are. And there's active drug culture and this isn't, people sitting smoking weed. This is their needles, their paraphernalia, their Chinese fentanyl. I mean, we've got really hardcore drugs on the street for whatever you feel about war on drugs, but we have very active drug trade on our streets again, which Operation Rio Grande was targeted getting rid of that predatory behavior. So this officer takes a sample of about 10 and finds 3 of those are off-grid sex offenders, and by that. I mean, they're no longer compliant with checking in with a parole officer, a probation officer, whatever the circumstance, and so they kind of just disappear, and they're probably in places that they shouldn't be, or they'd be checking in. So we know that there are a lot of these RVs. So I asked this officer, so how many are you talking about? You sampled 10. So what are there, 20, 50? He said they're over 100. And the thing is they came about 4 or 5 months ago, So sort of in the summer when we saw a little bit of the protest infusion in our city and in our state. And so he says, well, we've basically hung the banner and said, welcome to Utah. We won't do anything. Welcome to Utah. We're not going to stop you from doing anything you want to do in our city. So it's kind of turned back into a big mess. And I don't remember seeing it this bad, but it's getting worse. So one of the other issues that we've had around this is generally our approach to how we deal with people experiencing homelessness in our state. Hasn't been historically good, and it's just gotten worse. And Speaker Hughes, Greg Hughes, used to say, it's 40 years of failed Democrat policy. That's a big claim. 40 years of failed Democrat policy. Don't lots of cities experience this? Are they all Democrat-run cities? I think they are. I think they are. But what does that mean? What are the policies that contribute to this? So I'm going to invite Tyler on in just a second, but I want to kind of lay the groundwork for this. Historically, a lot of social services have been done through community, nonprofit, charitable organizations, churches, things like that. We really saw for almost the existence of our country, that's really where you saw a lot of social services happening, especially dealing with poverty.
And historically and traditionally, I would say that those kind of social services require accountability. That's kind of the trade-off. They're like, we'll help you, but we need this. We need you to look for a job, or we need you to come help us with what we're doing.
Well, and I think my own church is a good example of that. So a lot of charitable giving, a lot of charitable activity, but frequently, it's not just handing out a check, but it's come Tuesday for job training too, and let's
Right.
help you in.
Right.
And then there's a community, by the way. Mm-hmm. So when you do that, when it's community based, church community based or neighborhood community based, there's community, and we would sometimes call that wraparound services. And I think that's a nice expression because it is kind of wrapping around a person, really addressing a lot of the needs. So what happened a little bit over a decade ago is slowly over time, we've shifted a lot of community, nonprofit, and church-based social services to government. Because government does a better job of all things.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Sarcasm, parentheses. You'll throw up a sarcasm thing in parentheses. But they came to help. They came to help. So about 15 years ago, we had a number of organizations that dealt with homeless and transitional services, transitioning people from a state of homelessness or housing insecurity to more more self-reliance and stability. But you're right; they usually had something tied to that. So some job training, or if you're struggling with substance abuse, let's get you in substance abuse treatment. If you have some mental health needs, then let's get you into some of that. And sometimes, again, community, relationships can be very, very powerful in helping people find stability in their lives. But Congress passed a law that said any of the housing and urban development money that goes to these services have to be no strings attached. No strings attached.
When was that passed?
So this was, I want to say it was about 15 years ago.
Okay.
I should be better on the dates for this. But I actually just through this past legislative session found out that this was congressional law. I didn't realize it was. I just thought we did it in a very not effective way. But so Congress passes a law that says basically, and this is where I think you get some ideological things happening. People have a right to live where they want to live. Like if I want to live here, right here, in the studio, which is not in my home. Yeah, no, of course not. So, but there is this ideology that says people have the right to live where they want to live, and we really shouldn't push them away. And so that started creeping into public policy on dealing with services for homeless and transitional housing. So we will serve you, and we will try to provide you housing with no questions asked. So we don't care if you've got needles hanging out of your arms. We don't care if you're, you could really benefit from some appropriate medication or appropriate psychotherapy on the mental health side. This, the paradigm shifted to no questions asked services. Now, here's where the government gets insidious, I think. Not only is the ideology not what works, but the federal government says, okay, if you're going to accept any of these funds from us, then all of your funds must be appropriated under the similar paradigm, under that similar ideology of no questions asked. So we had some very, very healthy and effective and successful programs until this came in. And now they've all but disappeared. So we've shifted over almost entirely to these, our public funds are now funding public resources more. But some of our most successful programs are the Other Side Academy. That is a fantastic model. I would encourage you to Google search it. Go look at what they do. Fantastic program. Self-reliant, doesn't take a penny of public money.
And who is it? Just a nonprofit program? Who administers that?
So it's a nonprofit. It's a private nonprofit. But what they've done is they've built some enterprises into their services. So when you attend the academy, the Other Side Academy, you're immediately in a part of a community where you're going to kind of learn some rules, largely centered on looking out for each other. So there's a social component there, and but immediately you're going to help out. So whether you start with chores in the kitchen, or you end up working for one of their enterprises. So they have one of the best rated, I think the top rated moving companies in the state.
Oh wow!
So so people. They're getting the mental health and the substance abuse treatment that they need to participate. So this is a very self-reliant program, doesn't need any public funding, highly successful. And but
there's strings attached.
There's strings attached. So you're going to clean a kitchen. You're going to make a bed. You're going to try to get clean. You're going to get some skills. And what do you think happens at the end of this program? I mean, you have people who are self-reliant again, and,
right.
and they're less dependent.
Well, I'm reminded of this quote that I've heard a dozen times from Benjamin Franklin, where he says, "I am for doing good to the poor, but I think the best way of doing good to the poor is not making them easy in poverty, but leading or driving them out of it."
So that's got to be the goal. I mean, the goal has to be lifting people from poverty, and so I'm a member of the American Enterprise Institute Leadership Organization. So I've been blessed to sit at the feet of Arthur Brooks, and this has really been his life's mission, and really why I'm also so passionate about this is because it's not about what you see on 7th South. It's not that it's tents and cardboard and shopping carts. It's that they're people. And these are people that, for whatever reasons, whatever circumstances in their lives, may not be realizing their full potential. And it's the loss of human potential. It's the loss of human dignity. And really that's what's so profoundly sad about this. So it really is the human element. And so I have mentioned failed Democrat policy, but because I do believe that efforts to create and increase self-reliance really is the best thing that we can ever do for people who are suffering. And that's really what we see is a whole lot of human suffering. So we shifted public funding over to government regulated programs that say no strings attached. We're not going to ask you to do anything. And in the meanwhile, that public funding was then had then receded from these programs that have been really largely successful. Another one we have in this valley is Life Start Academy, which is amazing. It moves people from homelessness to home ownership. I mean, it's incredible. And they have about a 75% success rate. So only about 25% ever experience housing insecurity again. So that is a great success rate. Now, here's what the government side looks like. The public side, 7th South. So what's the difference? So you go about 4 blocks away and you see this booming organization with people that are begging to get in, and they're going to work hard when they get in, and they are lifted out of poverty into a place of human dignity and human potential, reaching their potential. And it's just so beautiful. So what's the difference? I mean, what's the difference? So we a couple years ago, the Utah legislature saw this explosion of people experiencing homelessness and said, this isn't working. Whatever you're doing is not working because the population is growing, the suffering, the obvious, visible suffering is growing. And so led by Speaker Greg Hughes, the legislature kind of made this a mission and said, this really is a crisis here. This really is this is an awful state. A lot of this was one of the problems was we had predatory criminals that preyed on this very, very vulnerable population. You had women and children. You had people who are suffering mental health disorders and substance addictions that were just being preyed upon. So Operation Rio Grande, we are 3-4 years out from that, and so jury's kind of still out on that. But what we did do is went in and said triage. Let's get rid of the criminal element. So worked hard to disperse that element. And phase 2 of Operation Rio Grande was to create more resource centers through more places of the valley. And that one is a little bit more controversial, whether you should consolidate those kinds of services close or if the disbursement works. But it was let's do something. And in the meantime, then there's got to be phase 3. So I took Speaker Hughes to some of these places and showed him. And I said, no, it does not matter what we do in phases 1 and 2 if we don't have the long-term solution for what really works. And he had never seen that. And so you all of a sudden have a night and day example just a couple blocks apart from each other. And so that was always the goal, is let's get there. In the meantime, we asked the auditors to look into the public side and the services where your tax dollars were going. And largely they were going to the road home. And they participated in, now there's a couple phrases I'm going to share with you. This notion of no strings attached services is called Housing First. It's the Housing First initiative. We'll put you in a house first, give you housing first. We'll worry about all the other stuff later. Whereas on the private side, it's the opposite. You come in and you're going to be clean. You come in and you have to be clean for X amount of time, or you have to be enrolled in a program, and you're gonna get up on time and start working toward your self sufficiency. So we had our auditors go in and say, what's going on here? And we had our informants that worked within the road home and throughout the service system telling us, look, it's a revolving door. So we invest a lot in a program called Rapid Rehousing. Millions of dollars in rapid rehousing. Just millions across the country. And that's what it's what it sounds like. Rapid rehousing. We're going to get you quickly into housing. We're going to give you a voucher. It's good for 90 days. And so we give out these vouchers. And here's what government does. Government says, look how successful we are because we gave out this many vouchers. So there's the success metric. Well, we find out that after those 90 days, what do you think happens to the people who had no strings attached, no requirements for them to participate, no requirements for them to be involved in their own recoveries? And
well, I know the news media has hailed this as a big success and revolutionary approach, an example around the country, because there are a handful of people that they were so desperate for shelter. And once they got that shelter, it enabled them and they were able to go where they needed or wanted to go and get back on their feet. But I would imagine that a majority of those people don't fit into that category.
No, so not a lot of them fit into that category. And there's a couple things that work against this. One is our state has a system of determining who gets those vouchers first. And it's based on some criteria that determines who's most vulnerable and who's most at risk. And so sometimes it's someone who's maybe a little more physically frail. Maybe they move ahead of the line of a healthier woman with children. We have anecdotes of, drug addicts who maybe are pretty, not likely to survive on the street tonight if he has to, so he gets the voucher ahead of the mother and the child. But here's what I don't know. We don't have good data on that. So we do know that a lot of these people, it's a revolving door. So after their 90 days, they come back and knock on the front door of the road home and say, I need back in. So we, like I said, we had some informants and so forth that said, here's some of the things you need to look for. So I talked to the auditors and said, look for this revolving door. Look for it. This is one piece we need to know. And so they came in and brought the findings of the audit and said, guess what? Yeah, there's no data. Yeah, we don't know. These people aren't being tracked very well. They're not identified very well. They kind of go in and out, and they may be recorded as frequently as a brand new person. So here's how government sometimes does this. Look at how many vouchers we gave. We're awesome because we gave out. So that means we're a success. They're coming back through the front door, though. So by the way, the people coming in back through the front door, that's a sign that it's growing and we need more money. So legislature, please give us more money because look at how many people are showing up that need services. And here's your 90-day voucher, and look how successful we are. And so we have this crazy revolving door, but we don't know to what extent. We just know this anecdotally. We don't know to what extent because they're not tracking the data. So I actually had legislation this last session to deal with the findings of the audit that said, hey, there's no coordination, there's no rhyme or reason, this stuff doesn't look like it's very successful, there's no leadership. Like, who do you put on the hot seat as a legislator? And I'm sitting in a budget committee trying to decide how much money we're going to give to these services. And lots of people are asking for it, but there's not a person we can put on the seat to say, so how you doing with that money we've already given you? And this is the point where I lean over to committee members who have been on this committee a lot longer than I have, and I'm like, hey, so Senator Weiler, who's in charge of homeless services in our state? I don't know. Representative Ray, who's in charge? Like, who's the boss applesauce? Somebody needs to sit in that chair, and we need to ask some questions because we need some accountability for the taxpayers' money. And nobody knew because, you know why? Because there wasn't any. There's no leadership in this state. So it's just all, there's money in pots that, different service providers, namely cities and counties, are trying to grab onto with no accountability. So I did have a bill that sought to coordinate the activities, have more integrity in the data, and to have some leadership. I didn't want to make it a state service because really these things are better done at the local level, but at least to have coordination to really truly help these the people who are suffering. And so that bill didn't pass. We really the governor's office likes it the way it is, and didn't chose to not support the bill in favor of keeping things the way it is, which also means there was no leadership or plans on COVID response in our shelters. Really, we've got to do something here. And just a couple weeks ago, Deseret News writes another article and says it's happening again. It's exploding down Salt Lake City. And we need that legislation. We need those changes more than ever. And by the way, the bill got the attention of President Trump had just appointed a homeless czar. We all hate the term, but it's kind of what people end up calling him anyway, Dr. Marbut. And so he saw what we were doing on the legislation, thought it was excellent, came to town, spent about a week advocating for, what works in this bill. He thought was, the fairly model for what cities and states should look at doing. But we didn't get that passed, and now we have a big problem. Big problem. Okay, so I think I laid out the principles and the history. 40 years of failed Democrat policy, really bad policy of the last 10, 15 years, where we are seeing massive encampments, and we have, the police are telling us, we have hung the banner and said, come to Salt Lake, we're going to do nothing. And all of a sudden, we have a little bit of convergence of the protest movement at the same time, and we have increased property crimes, and we have residents that aren't getting responses. We have businesses that are very, very frustrated, making some pretty strong demands of the city to do something. So here we are.
It sounds like drugs. We can go to Salt Lake for drugs.
Yeah, I don't know. But, part of it is with COVID, we have less tourism. We have a little bit less of just people going anywhere, really. So some of this might be flying a little bit under radar, but if you live in Salt Lake City, you see it live and daily and people in your backyard. Okay, so Tyler, we have kept you on. That was like
Wake up.
long monologue there. But so Tyler, you are the executive director of the Pioneer Park Coalition. Why don't you tell us what you do and what you know about this?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that great background on how we got to where we are today. I think that's essential in figuring out where do we go from here. With that being said, the Pioneer Park Coalition, we're a community advocacy organization. We started really in the Rio Grande Pioneer Park area, kind of where you mentioned about Operation Rio Grande. That was one of our first big initiatives that we pushed for. But really who we're made up of, and you can look on our website at our board of directors, and then just throughout our network, we have everyone from social workers to firefighters to pipe fitters. I would say the best and most concise definition of who the Pioneer Park Coalition is concerned citizens who deserve better. I'm a firm believer that you get what you put up with in life. And I think that that's exactly what you hit on in Salt Lake City is we've put up with this for a very long time. And really, we shouldn't be surprised that these are the consequences. So the two main things today that I think fit perfectly into our discussion is we are with you. We are pushing for homelessness reform. We do believe that there should be a streamlined process and a homelessness director who can sit on the hot seat, as you say, and be able to answer questions about accountability. Where is the money being spent? And how are our results going? We are a firm believer. Jack Kemp put it like this. He said, we should measure our success not by how many people we give aid to, but how many people don't need it anymore. That's the real metric of success that we should be measuring.
So absolutely, I'm glad you said that because I wanted to make that point as well. Serving in the Utah legislature and in our social services budget committee, so frequently the performance metrics are, did you do the thing, not did the thing work? And so in the last 2 years, we've spent over 400 million, 400 million with an M, on homeless and transitional services. But we have removed not very many people from homelessness. So somewhere around 100, I think.
Right.
Yeah. So 67 in 1 year, and a year that we spent over $200 million. That's, that gets to be a price tag where you can buy everybody a home. And that's not
A nice one.
a nice one. And that is not the objective of services. It is to strengthen people so that they may achieve their human potential and restore their human dignity. And so I really think that the approach of the Housing First and some of these revolving door programs, really that's a sad state of things to be almost complicit in that suffering, to not truly want to. Well, I don't want to be careful with that. I do think there's a whole lot of. I think most people in this service area probably truly want to help people, but we need to do what works. And I think sometimes there are too many people that they feel good if they threw money at it and they can sleep at night, but did it really help? So you've been watching this for years, and where are we now? What are you seeing?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. You don't have to be a social scientist to know that something has to change. I mean, you take a drive, like you said, you can go on North Temple, you can go back to the Rio Grande area, Topher Park, you can go to the ballpark. We're seeing a lot of these just apparent issues with the system. Reform is needed, and I think, as you alluded to, the Deseret News article is a good example. But a lot of people are coming around to that same conclusion that you and I are at, is where we need to know, because frankly, donors and the public are getting weary of consistently being asked for more and more money, and seeing not just a lack of results, but also the opposite effect.
That's
point,
interesting.
I'm
sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no. To your point, I think that if we have more accountability in the system, service providers will have more money because the confidence in the system will be strengthened.
So you mentioned donors, and I think that was something that surprised me when I started really getting involved. I've been involved for years, but this year, some of the large donors, some of our some key philanthropists in our state, they had the same concern. Is we want our money to do good, we want our money to help, and we're not sure that's happening here. The taxpayer money, we want it to do good and to help, and sometimes we may be sustaining a failed program. And I would argue that that's exactly what we're doing. When you can go to Other Side Academy and see how successful that academy is, and by the way, they're very, very open to, they love to share their program. The students are always willing to talk to you about the program and their experiences. So if you have any desire to learn more about that program, give them a call. And it really is amazing. So there is a program that receives no public money, but we are sustaining, we are propping up with taxpayer money, with the sort of the government stamp on it, the programs that don't work as well, and maybe keep people in cycles of poverty and homelessness. And that's a tragedy. I mean, that's a tragedy.
It is.
But,
it is.
Often on our side of the aisle, we are the ones who get accused of being heartless and only caring about money. And that's not it at all. That's not it at all. It is that there are human faces behind all of this. And are we helping, or are we sustaining things that don't really work? So,
Well, you're so right. And I think when we talk about compassion, I mean, I was walking down in Pioneer Park area, kind of walking towards the train station the other day. I saw a gentleman who was standing in the middle of the street, almost in a daze of some sort, who was probably going through some drug high at the moment, and I just think to myself, okay, so a system that we all just walk right past him and just say, hey, keep doing what you're doing. That's compassionate. I think if it was any of our family members, we would want drastic, radical change, some huge initiatives to change someone's life, not just walk by them and give them a pat on the back and say we're judging you if we try to help you get off of heroin or whatever it might be.
well, and that person is somebody's son,
It is
maybe a sibling, maybe a parent, and there's likely family and friends out there that are hoping and praying that that something does happen to turn their lives around. So to keep people trapped in systems that don't work really is a tragedy of our time. So we have this interesting conflation of events, though. So about the same time we see this new influx of our homeless population in encampments, then we see something else happen this summer. You know a little bit about that? So what else? What else happened downtown that's making things a little bit worse?
Well, it's a perfect storm or an imperfect storm, depending on how you look at it. What we're seeing is a really big uptick in crime. It's not just property crime, unfortunately. It's violent crime as well. We're seeing increases in homicide, theft, robbery, aggravated assault. And all of these numbers you can find on the Salt Lake City Police Department website through their CompStat program. Paul Cassell, who is a former U.S. attorney and current law professor at the University of Utah, has done some extensive research on this topic. And unfortunately, Salt Lake City is not an outlier in this circumstance. Across the country, in Philadelphia, New York City, Minneapolis, Chicago, and other large metropolitan areas, we've seen a couple things all happen at once. We've seen the COVID-19 pandemic. Officers were asked to stop, the proactive policing, to basically respond when you need to. I think a lot of police departments and city governments didn't know how long this would go for, thought it might be a temporary thing. The second thing is we're seeing a defund the police movement across many big cities, including Salt Lake City. It's very loud, very vocal group that supports defunding the police. They're critical of everything the police do. And so a lot of police officers are leaving the department in Salt Lake City and other big cities around the nation because they feel they're not appreciated. And they're going out and risking their lives and then being hated for it. And then the last thing that the confluence that you talked about is we're seeing a revolving door at the jail. Due to COVID-19, a lot of judges are very hesitant to put people in jail, especially for what they would consider low-level crimes. But even in Salt Lake County, we were able to meet with Sheriff Rosie Rivera. She showed us that there's even felony offenders being let out the same day.
Okay, who's letting them out? Who's making that decision?
This is the judges. The reason that law enforcement is so demoralized, I know you've probably heard the same thing, but when I talk to Salt Lake City police officers, they say, I make an arrest at 2 o'clock. I bring him to the jail. He's back in the same spot by 8 o'clock. It's a revolving door. There was a gentleman in Salt Lake City just this past month. He's been arrested for carjacking 6 times in a row.
Carjacking.
This is not 6 times in a row within 1 month. I mean, that's a lifetime rap sheet and he racked it up in a month. And so to your point, you talked about how we put that sign that says, welcome to Salt Lake City. We're not going to do anything. I think criminals are getting the same message. They're saying, hey, look,
oh, yeah.
the the police department is overburdened. They're a little bit understaffed right now. The COVID-19 tactics of reining back that proactive policing, and then with all the hate and the defunding the police, I think you probably saw it too. Pat Bagley in the Salt Lake Tribune posted that cartoon of caricaturing a Utah police officer as a Ku Klux Klan member.
Oh my gosh, that
It's shameful.
That was absolutely shameful. Absolutely across the lines.
And we shouldn't be surprised when we see a direct result. I mean, like I said before, you don't have to be a social scientist to understand that when you have a revolving door at the jail, you have a movement that is actively demonizing and vilifying our public servants and in public safety, and then you have a pandemic where our police officers have been asked to stand down and go less proactive policing. Why do we think that there's a spike in homicide? Why do we think that there's a spike in violent crime? It's clear that we have to return back to proactive policing and get back to what policing is all about, which is preventing crime and making our communities safer.
So what are you hearing about turnover in the Salt Lake City Police Department? I know you're hearing what I'm hearing.
I'm hearing that there's quite a bit of turnover, unfortunately, and I think you hear conflicting accounts depending on who you ask, but I know that there's a lot of police officers in Salt Lake right now that are looking to go to other departments in the county, Weber County, and even down to Utah County as well.
And, so I live half an hour away on the west side of Salt Lake County. So why should I care? For one, because my phone rings a lot and people are saying we need help. And
Right.
and I'm hearing repeatedly, I'm calling city officials, they don't call me back. I'm calling legislative officials, they don't call me back. But we heard Representative Coleman might take my call. But really, it's our capital city. It's our gateway to the state. And it is the first impression visitors and business have when they come here. That experience can really go far. And we live in the world of reviews and ratings, and it's not that hard to get the word out that Salt Lake has some problems. Do you really want to hold your convention here next year? Do you really want to make it your family destination? So it really kind of impacts the whole state to have the state of the lack of law enforcement and
Right.
and our encampments and what is Pioneer Park Coalition? What are you guys trying to do?
Well, I think you bring up a great point. How we all have a stake in this fight. I also think too that it's important. The Pioneer Park Coalition, like you said, in the past we've gotten flack for, you talked about decreasing homelessness decreases property value. This is our capital city. We want people to come here and invest and work. But I think beyond that, when you look at the neighborhoods who are seeing the most drastic increase in homicide and crime, it's the neighborhoods who are in the most poverty. It's the more diverse neighborhoods. We're seeing our minority communities being overwhelmingly affected by this crime spike.
So you're suggesting that criminality chooses where it's going to take root?
Without a doubt. And I think that when they look at in the most vulnerable populations, that's where they want to prey. One of the, I'm sure you read the article, but how they arrested 21 of the Aryan Brotherhood white supremacist gang members in the state of Utah. Well, guess where one of them was stationed out? He was at Topher Park in one of the homeless encampments. So you're telling me that this is the best case scenario, that we just say, okay, we don't know who you are or what your deal is. You could be a member of a violent gang, but go ahead and set up shop at a public park where our youth and where our families go out and play and live their lives. It's unacceptable, and the status quo needs to change. And I think that's what a lot of people are seeing. You talked about you're getting calls. They're saying anyone. I'll talk to anyone. Representative Coleman or the Pioneer Park Coalition or Mayor Mendenhall, something needs to change, and that's apparent.
And, they really did have a champion in Speaker Greg Hughes for a couple years there. And I think that that's been a loss for continuity of, kind of getting these reforms cemented in. And but, he couldn't be there forever. And unfortunately, those efforts were not continued. And we have seen a regression back toward the same problems we saw in the beginning. But so I actually have a minor. It's a certificate in criminology I got a long time ago before CSI made it cool. So I'm not really sure why I did it, but I loved it. But, that was one of the rules is, one of the first things you learn is criminality takes the path of least resistance. And it doesn't take a lot of resistance. But, you're saying that the neighborhoods that are already vulnerable, maybe because they can't put up the same resistance as another neighborhood. I put a post about this on Facebook. It's probably been about 2 months now, and I had people come on and say, I live in this city. It is not happening. That is not happening. I've never seen it. It's not happening here. I'm like, gosh, you're 4 blocks away from where I know a hot spot, with the lady with people going through her fence into her backyard. Frightening things. She told me a story about how she was taking her garbage out and she noticed 2 raccoon eyes in the corner of her yard under a tree. And then those eyes went up to 6 feet and she realizes someone's in her backyard. And she called and nobody came. So these. So you're absolutely right that the criminality will find the place where people tend to be more vulnerable, or where the police aren't. Maybe, I don't know that that's a police decision, but there are definitely factors that will make some neighborhoods more vulnerable. And so what's the solution?
Right. Well, you hit on some really interesting points. I think, too, it's important, just for context, about up until the 80s, law enforcement was looked at as a criminal response. You call them, they'll show up after the fact, they'll investigate, and they'll find out. I mean, social scientists and criminologists really had no time for the thought that police could impact crime rates, or the amount or the strategy of policing could impact the crime rates. Well, New York City, under the leadership of Bill Bratton, Jack Maple, Rudy Giuliani, John Timoney, really turned that on its head in the mid to late 90s. Through a slew of different techniques and increased investment and increased officers, they were able to drastically reduce not just violent crime, but all sorts of quality of life issues for the city of New York. And if you talk to anyone who lived through that, including, I know, a lot of people in Salt Lake City who have moved from New York City and can remember that change. So specifically, what I and the Pioneer Park believe would make a huge impact on the level of crime in Salt Lake City is 3 things, and they kind of all go under the headline or the qualifier that we do need to support our police department. Pushing for reform is great. Having a better response to mental health crisis and other issues is great. But we need to support our men and women who are putting their lives on the line to protect our families. We need to have some foot patrols. If you look anywhere across the country, in all the studies that have been done, a visible foot patrol, 2 police officers walking the beat, makes a marked impact on crime. If you're a criminal, I mean, it's really simple. If you're a criminal and you know that there's 2 police officers walking the neighborhood or the area, you're going to go somewhere else.
That's that path of least resistance. Even a passive, visible potential resistance.
Exactly. It's that visibility, and that is nowhere to be found right now. The second thing is, I think the Salt Lake City Police Department should invest in a warrant squad. So they should go through their list of warrants specifically for violent crimes, violence against women, assault, and up until homicide. And they need to invest some resources and seek out those bad actors who are preying on our most vulnerable populations and get them into prison. And the last thing is really a long-term effort, but it's a concept called pinpoint policing. And Salt Lake City Police Department uses CompStat, and they map out using heat maps and a statistical analysis program where most crime is happening. They can put in what types of crime, the quantity, and what's going on. And the idea behind that is you deploy your officers based on those crime maps, those heat maps. Right now, the Salt Lake City Police Department doesn't have the resources available to do that. They're worried about just getting to, I talked to one officer. They've got dozens of calls when they get on the queue, when they get on their shift. We need to change the reach of the Salt Lake City Police Department from deploying resources where we can and deploying resources where we should. Ultimately, getting back to the basics with that pinpoint policing, using that CompStat method, we're going to see the biggest impact through there when we get to that point.
This morning, our Utah Legislature's Law Enforcement Criminal Justice Committee, we passed, made a motion to support an ongoing. I'm not going to get the word right, but it's giving peer support and mental health support for police officers, and so we all voted to let's go ahead and keep that effort going. But I can't help but think, no, I don't have to think this. This was the testimony given in the last meeting last month, is that there is a spike in mental health stress for our officers, and that the protests had a big impact on that as well. That definitely that is affecting their concern for safety, their concern for their careers, and watching maybe a few bad actors across the country, but they get lumped in as as the bad guys, and that they take that home every night but leave in the morning prepared to fight for our lives, maybe even give their own. Cody Brotherson,
Yep.
he went to school with my kids, and such a community tragedy, such a tragic loss of life at such a young age, such a good man. But he would go out. So many of them, they suit up in the morning and they go out and know that that's the risk they take. And the current climate that they're hearing their careers, their identities being so vilified by so many people that just doesn't make sense. I'm also involved with an organization called Moms for Safe Neighborhoods, a national organization. You might have seen our ads on TV, but really it looks at what do you want your neighborhoods to look like? And some of these cities that are burning, is that really who do we want to have control of our cities? And so we sure don't want to see Salt Lake continue down that path, and we need these safe neighborhoods. And we're hearing alarming numbers of the number of people who are trying to transfer out of Salt Lake City Police Department. Figure I was given was 80 last month alone, in the last 30 days or so, which is about half of the size of the patrol force. I mean, that's very frightening. So, and so all of this impacting their mental health, their strain, their stress, and even before this movement, the legislature, we had frequent discussions about retention. That was already hard to attract new officers into the field and then retain them once they were in. And now there's this, and we need to support our police.
Well, Kim, you're spot on, and voices like you, voices like the Pioneer Park Coalition, officers know they can count on as consistent support. I think what's missing is right now the most vocal voices, I believe, is the minority, are saying defund the police. You've got Pat Bagley calling them white supremacists, and all the nonsense there. I think there's a majority of people who, when they call 911, they're praying that someone responds in a timely manner. When something goes afoot in the night, they want the best possible police force to show up to their house. And so I think that's really what we need to get the message across as well, is for average citizens and neighborhoods like you talked about, this organization. I'm not familiar with it, but coalesce and make your voice heard, whether that's at city council meeting, whether that's at a letter to the editor in the newspaper. Your police officers in your city need to know that they're supported when they go out. It's a tough job as it is, like you said. It's always been a tough job, but I think in 2020 it's one of the hardest jobs that's out there right now.
So, Tyler, thanks for being with us tonight. And where can people get more information? Do you have a website with resources or just about your organization?
Absolutely. So you can go to pioneerpark.co, and that's our website. If you look up Pioneer Park Coalition team, you'll see our board of directors, who you can reach out to any of them. People can always email me as well if they want to get more involved, and we have a slew of initiatives that we're always working on. We also are going to come up to the legislature. I think one thing that just to put this in context, what you mentioned earlier, how you want one person on the hot seat. There's currently 11 governing bodies when it comes to making decisions about homelessness. So even if all of those bodies had 6 people, which is the minimum, that's almost 100 people making decisions all across the state. And so things like that, we're involved with, we're concerned citizens involved in shaping policy and speaking up for our communities. So my email is director@pioneerpark.co, so people can reach me there. We also have a newsletter that you could sign up for on our website to keep looped in with all of our news as well.
Well, thank you so much again for giving us some background about your organization and what you're seeing and how we can help. So also, I'm Candidly Kim. This is the Candidly Kim podcast. We don't have a marketing arm of our big 2-person effort here. So we really appreciate some likes and some shares. Follow us. You can find us on Podbean. Where else? iTunes. Where else?
YouTube.
And I usually post this on Facebook. So we'd love a follow, love a like, love a share. If you like what you're hearing, also let us know what you want us to talk about too, because we like to talk. But these are some serious issues. That's what we're hoping to speak very candidly about, some very serious issues in our state. And, and we're not alone. Like Tyler said, this is the experience of a lot of states and a lot of cities. And they really are, based on some fundamental ways of thinking and approaching how we do government, really.
Yeah, there was a documentary that came out last year about Seattle. Seattle is Dying. It was made by one of the news stations up there. And it sounds like we're just going right down that same road. The investigation that they did showed some things that Seattle was not doing that were successful in other states to address the homelessness and the drug issues. It's a really sobering. I can only imagine it's even worse now with the introduction of COVID, the protests, everything like that. But it's very clear that Salt Lake, not far behind.
And winter's around the corner. We've already had some pretty cold nights, so we can see more problems, more suffering there. Was really hoping to pass the legislation, understanding that before the next session is a winter, and that's particularly brutal on people. Another good one to watch is Arthur Brooks' The Pursuit. So actually watch that with my young adult and teenage children, and they really enjoyed The Pursuit. Really looks at globally and historically how people have been lifted from poverty to self-reliance. The biggest factor that has lifted over 2 billion people from poverty is pure capitalism and people being free to explore and create and participate in economies. And so
you're saying a socialist or a communist utopia is not the answer?
only sometimes, and then when America does it.
Oh, okay.
No.
So we
no.
just haven't done it
No,
right yet.
No, Dorn. No, socialism and communism doesn't work. But a great documentary. I mean, it really is. Just to say documentary goes, oh no, I don't want to watch that. But really, it was my family was pretty glued to it and really appreciated what they learned from that video. Went to Oregon, went to New York. Sorry, not Oregon. Went to India, Calcutta, and New York, and really. Very similar programs they highlighted to the Other Side Academy that we have right here. So anyway, thanks again for being with us, Kennelly Kim, and look for us in a couple more days. And anything else you want to say, Dorn?
No, I think I've said enough.
All righty. Good evening.